Welcome to the Higher Power Podcast, presented by Higher Power Sports PT, the show dedicated to helping active individuals like you unlock your full potential through expert insights on injury prevention, performance enhancement, and recovery. Kurt Kessler is a board-certified specialist in sports physical therapy and an athletic trainer. In each episode, he and his guests bring you the latest evidence-based strategies to help you move better, feel stronger, and stay injury-free. Let's learn together.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Higher Powered Podcast. Today, we're talking about anti-aging, but not in the way that most people think about it. I'm not talking about wrinkles and looking younger. This is about moving well for a long time, staying capable, staying athletic, and avoiding that slow decline that a lot of people just accept as normal. Now, I will say this. I'm going to focus on the lower body today. Next episode, I will transition to the upper body. And this is going to sound maybe a little bit complex. That's not really what I'm aiming for. But in order to give the proper context, I do want to be thorough. So if you have any follow-up questions or if you don't quite understand anything that I'm saying today, but you want further clarification, please just make sure you reach out to me afterwards. But what I want to do today is kind of narrow the focus, because instead of talking about the whole body, I want to talk about two areas that tend to decline first and quietly drive a lot of the issues that people deal with later on in life. Today, I'll talk about the core and the low back and the rest of the lower body. And then, like I said, the next episode, I'll go into upper body. If you really zoom out and think about how the body works, everything comes down to two things: your ability to control your center and your ability to interact with the ground. Your core and your low back control position. Your lower body creates and accepts force. And if either one of those systems starts to fall off, everything else has to compensate. Most people don't lose function evenly. They just don't get weaker everywhere at the same time. What actually happens is they lose range of motion that they don't use. They lose strength at the ends of their ranges, and they lose control in positions that they never train. Then over time, they become really good at a very narrow slice of movement, usually in the sagittal plane or the straightforward plane, moving straight forward, and they usually stay in like the mid-range of motion, and also usually in very controlled environments. And then when life or sport demands something outside of that, that's when things start to break down. So let's look at the center first with the core and the low back. Most people think they're training their core, but they're really just training their abs. And sometimes it might not be well understood what the difference is between those. But if you're training your abs, you're doing crunches, sit-ups, maybe planks, maybe some leg raises. And those things aren't bad, but they miss the primary role of the core, which is not to create movement, it's to control it. Now, before I go any further, let me zoom back out and talk about what the core really is. We think about the abs because we can see them in the mirror, or used to see them in the mirror. A simple way to think about it is this: your core is your body's transfer station. Any force you create with your legs or your arms has to pass through your core first. If that area is stable and controlled, then the force transfers efficiently from upper body to lower body or to wherever it needs to go, and movement feels really strong and coordinated. If it's not, then you lose energy, things compensate, and stress gets dumped into places like your low back or your hips or your knees. And when I say lose energy, think about like, a water bottle, and if you poke a hole in it, you're draining some of that water out through that hole. There's a weak spot in that container, and the water seeps out of that. Energy transfer from lower body to upper body and so forth acts in a very similar manner. So to give you more concrete examples, the top of your core, the top part here, is your diaphragm, the thing that expands when you breathe in. The core starts there, and it's also why I heavily incorporate breathing exercises into my programs, because if we can't control the pressure within the abdomen, then something else is going to stabilize, like the quads or hip flexors or low back muscles. So it starts literally with the breath that comes in. Then the walls, if I was standing up, you'd be able to see, but the walls, we have your six-pack abs on the front, you have your obliques on the sides, you have your transverse abdominis, which is a deep core muscle, one of the most important, in my opinion, that kind of wraps around the body, that wraps around the pelvis, and then muscles of the lower back that connect the ribs to the pelvis. And then the last thing, the most overlooked part of the core is the pelvic floor. For a deeper dive on this, check out episode 5 with Ashley Crew. But the pelvic floor is a group of muscles, almost like a bowl shape at the bottom of your pelvis. Its job is to work in coordination with your diaphragm, your abdominals, and your low back muscles to manage the pressure and stabilize your spine. When you breathe, move, or lift, the pelvic floor subtly contracts and then it relaxes to help control your intra-abdominal pressure, which is what gives your spine support and allows force to transfer efficiently through your body. If it's functioning well, it contributes to stability, balance, and control without you even noticing it. If it's not functioning well, you can lose that pressure control, which can lead to energy leaks, which is what I described earlier, decreased performance, or issues like low back discomfort, hip instability, or even things like leakage, urinary or fecal leakage with higher level activity. So within the core, the pelvic floor isn't just about support. It's really a key piece of the system that helps everything stay coordinated and efficient under load. Your core is designed to resist motion. It stabilizes your spine. It controls the relationship between your rib cage and your pelvis. And it allows you to transfer force from your lower body to your upper body and back again. If that system is working well, you get really efficient movement. If it's not, you end up getting compensation. One of the biggest things that declines over time is the ability to control the spine in different positions. People lose the ability to segmentally move their spine or, roll down one at a time. And instead, well, I guess I'll just keep going on this path. They lose the ability to move their spine, and they lose the ability to dissociate their hips from their lumbar spine, and they lose the ability to maintain the trunk position under load. So what you end up seeing is either excessive stiffness, you're really stiff and can't move in some areas of the spine, or you'll see things where everything moves as like one unit instead of, being able to move here when it needs to and move here. Instead, everything comes along for the ride. And then you get really stiff and rigid movement that way. Or the flip side of that, if, something is super stable, something is rigid, something is not moving, well, you have to get that movement from somewhere else. So the flip side is you get excessive motion where parts of the lumbar spine start moving too much to make up for the limitations elsewhere. And that's where a lot of low back discomfort starts to show up. Not because the back is weak in a traditional sense, but because it's either doing too much or it's lost its ability to control motion. So when we think about anti-aging training for the core, we're not just talking about getting stronger. We're talking about maintaining your movement options. Can you control flexion or when you bend forward? Can you control extension or when you bend backwards? Can you resist rotation when you need to? Can you create rotation when you need to? Can you hold a position while your arms and legs are moving dynamically? That's a very different approach than just doing more reps of the same core exercises. And what I see most commonly is people lose the ability to maintain stability through the front part of their core, I call it the anterior core, the front part of the core. It's where you would find your six-pack abs, but it goes a lot further beyond just that specific muscle. But this is all across the age spectrum. I had an elite field hockey player who couldn't hold a hollow hold for 5 seconds. A hollow hold is if you're lying on your back, you lift your feet up 6 inches, you lift your arm and your head up 6 inches, and you hold that position. This player could not hold for even 5 seconds, and she is, one of the best athletes I've ever worked with. But then you also see it a lot in middle age and older age when we really just stop training core and power consistently. That inability to stabilize the front part of your core often presents with the pelvis dumping forward and then stability being forced on the low back. We can end up getting achiness or feeling a little pinchy in the low back, even get sciatic nerve symptoms. This is a super common one that I'm seeing. From there, everything feeds into the lower extremity or the lower body. And this is where things get really interesting because most people train their legs, but they don't train them in a way that preserves long-term function. They train what's easy to load and what feels strong, but not actually what keeps them moving well over time. The first big piece here is hip extension, specifically through the glutes or your butt muscles. Most people think they're training their glutes, but they're often doing it in a way that doesn't really translate to movement. Like you can do fire hydrant exercises and donkey kicks, post a video on Instagram with hashtag booty work, but you still might be missing the mark on this. People either get stuck in the mid-range of extension or they can't get there and they end up compensating through their low back to get into that range of motion. True hip extension, where the glute max is doing the work and the pelvis and spine are controlled, is something that a lot of people lose over time. And when you lose that, other things have to pick up the slack. The hamstrings start doing more, the low back starts doing more, and you lose power in things like walking, running, and jumping. So anti-aging from a lower body standpoint has to include maintaining strong controlled hip extension, especially at the end range. My favorite example of this is referees. When I'm working games, the referees are usually middle-aged to senior citizens, former athletes themselves. But if you look at most refs, they have small butts or flat butts. And when they run, you see a few things. They either run very upright because they're in so much lumbar or low back extension, and or they run down the field kind of high stepping because they can't get that leg behind them. So the drive becomes very hip dominant or hip flexor or just very forward dominant instead of being able to get that hip behind them, not able to get that whole leg behind them really. And this is really across society, but the ref butt never fails. Glute max is a big power muscle in our body. And the reason why we lose our butts as we age is because we, one, lose that hip extension motion either from a sedentary lifestyle or having a seated job or something to that effect. And two, once we are out of athletics, we stop training power. So when you stop training power, you lose your motion, you lose your glute max doesn't have to work. So the body adapts by letting it shrink and move in the patterns that are stronger or more available. But where this actually affects you is if you're running and not getting full extension, meaning your leg isn't really driving behind you, you end up staying a little more bent at the hip than you should. And when that happens, your body has to find another way to keep you moving forward. So instead of using your glutes to push you forward, you start relying more on your quads to do the work. That shifts more stress down to the knee, especially through the patellar tendon, that little firm spot between your kneecap and that bump on the front of your shin. Because now the quad is doing more of the heavy lifting to absorb force and propel you forward. And over time, that creates a more knee-dominant running pattern where you're loading the front of your knee more than you should. So it's not just a hip issue, it's a whole chain reaction. If you lose hip extension, the knee ends up paying the price. The next piece is single leg control. And this is where a lot of people really start to fall off. Life and sport happens one leg at a time. Walking, running, cutting, going up and down stairs, it's all single leg. But most training is still very bilateral and very stable, meaning when you're at the gym or when you're working out, you're probably doing a lot of double leg squats or basically when I say bilateral, it's training both legs at the same time. Or if you're doing like knee extension, you're kicking both out at the same time. And again, a knee extension machine is a very stable exercise. So it's going to make you, it's going to be, I love it for certain things in sports, especially getting quad strength back in people who need it. But in terms of anti-aging and staying adaptable, that is really only training that one position in a very controlled motion. So people get really strong in positions that don't actually challenge their ability to control their body in space. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying don't do leg extensions. Like I said, it's one of my favorite exercises, especially for quad strengthening. But when we talk about not losing our movement options and not losing our ability to function as we age, we really should be looking a little bit more at doing unilateral or training one leg at a time, so that one, we're keeping stability in those legs, and two, it transfers a little bit more cleanly to going upstairs or everything that you have to do on one leg but you don't realize. But what happens is over time you start to lose control of that side to side and rotational movement. So like twisting, and that goes for upper and lower extremity. So your body gets less stable when you're on one leg or changing direction. Then the pelvis kind of drops, the knee collapses inward, and the force doesn't really get transferred efficiently. That not only affects your performance in sports, but it also increases stress on joints like the knee and the ankle. So maintaining that single leg strength and control, especially when you're fatigued or you start to get tired and in multiple planes, meaning front and back, side to side, and rotation, it's a huge part of staying functional long term. And then going down a little bit further, we get down to the calf complex, which is one of the most underrated areas in the entire body. But most people either don't train their calves at all, or they train them in a very limited way. And I could do several different podcasts on different episodes on, how different ways to train the calves or why we might train them in different ways. But I think for the most part, we train them in very limited ways. But your calves, especially the soleus, so if you think about your calf, there are three muscles, but two main muscles that move the ankle in that direction. One is the gastrocnemius, we call it the gastroc. That's the superficial, or the one that's on top that you can see. If you look in the mirror and you kind of raise your heel up, that's the one that you're going to see. The soleus sits under that, and it's kind of like a longer muscle. You'll feel that muscle belly kind of underneath where your calf or your gastroc is. And they play two different roles. The gastroc, or the one that you see more visibly in the mirror, is really used a lot for pushing off in gait. It's a little bit more. It's more of a power muscle. It turns on very quickly, but it works primarily when the knee is straight. Now, the soleus kind of does the opposite. It does that same movement, but we use it a lot more than we realize. When we think about our calves, we usually think about the gastroc because that's the one that we see. But the soleus, anytime the knee is bent and your heel is coming off the ground, that's when that muscle is working. So it translates a lot in the gait cycle, or when you're walking, and it plays a really massive role in sports, because how often in sports, I'm not saying the gastroc isn't important, but how often in sports are we moving with a completely straight leg? Not very often. So when you are, cutting and twisting and your knee is bent, your hips are dropped a little bit and you have to change direction, it's really that soleus that's getting a lot of that push off instead of the gastroc, like a lot of people think. So anyways, the soleus plays a massive role in how you move, but these muscles are responsible for controlling the forward movement of your tibia or your shin. They're responsible for absorbing force and helping to propel you forward. And what's really important here is that the soleus, like I said, it works most when the knee is bent, which is how we actually move in real life. Walking, running, changing direction, these things are not straight leg activities. So if you're only training straight leg calf raises, you're missing a huge piece of this movement system. When this area starts to decline, you lose efficiency. Running becomes more taxing. Your foot and ankle become a little less stable, and other tissues like the plantar fascia and Achilles tendon start to take on more load than they should. And that brings us to the foot itself. This is also a very overlooked part of the body. And I'll admit I have had my own foot issues in the last couple of years, and it's probably not my strongest area of understanding and knowledge and training, but I can at least appreciate how important a lot of the stuff is. And I've been trying to learn more on how to best serve this, because going back to the point I made at the beginning of the podcast, part of this movement system is being able to push force off of the ground. And so it all starts with your foot in contact with the ground. But it's really important for long-term health. People, they'll put their feet in shoes all day long. They don't train their feet. And then they're surprised when problems start to show up. Your foot has to function as both a mobile adapter and a rigid lever. It needs to be able to move and absorb force, but also needs to stiffen up so that it can push you off, push you forward. And that requires strength in the intrinsic foot muscles, or the little tiny muscles that go in between the bones of your feet. It really need to focus on control of your arch and proper function of the big toe. A lot of people don't realize the vast importance that the big toe has in movement. So when that system breaks down, you see things like plantar fasciitis, toe pain, bunions, poor force transfer, all the way up the chain. And again, it's not just about pain. It's really about losing efficiency and losing movement options. So if we zoom back out again and look at all of this together, the pattern becomes really clear. Anti-aging training isn't about doing more. It's about doing what most people neglect. It's about maintaining control of your center. It's about maintaining your strength and mobility at the hips, maintaining single leg stability, and maintaining function of your whole lower leg and your foot. It's about training the positions and movements that you don't naturally fall into anymore. Because the people who age well physically, the ones who keep moving well into their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, they're not doing anything crazy. They've just maintained these systems really well. They never stopped using them, and they never let them fall off. So if you take anything from this episode, let it be this. Don't just train what feels strong. Don't just train what's easy to load. Train the things that are quietly disappearing, because that's what's keeping you capable long term. I want people to be informed and educated. I want people to move well. I want people to be as active as they want. I want people to be pain-free. So if you're struggling with something along these lines, I want you to take the step and get some help. I'm going to be a little bit critical of the profession here for a second. If you're in PT for knee pain and you're only getting exercises for your knee, it's probably missing the mark. If your rehab exercises aren't challenging you in some way, it's definitely missing the mark. There are a lot of ways to get people out of pain, but the point I'm trying to make is that I care that you reach your goals, and your rehab should reflect that. I would love to be a resource for you to take the first step in getting what you need. If this podcast helped, or you found it interesting, share it with someone who's still training hard, but maybe not training smart. And then next episode, like I said, I will tackle the upper body as well. So thank you all for listening. That's going to do it for today's episode. If you're looking for ways to connect, please find ways to do so in the show notes, or find me on Instagram at Higher Power Sports PT. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Higher Powered Podcast, presented by Higher Powered Sports PT. We hope you gained valuable insights on how to stay strong, move better, and prevent injury, all backed by expert knowledge in sports physical therapy and athletic training. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more evidence-based tips and strategies to active individuals just like you. For more resources or to connect with us, head over to hpsportspt.com. That's hpsportspt.com. Remember, you've got the power to perform at your best. Keep training smarter, recovering faster, and living stronger. Just a reminder that the content shared in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be considered medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your health or treatment plan. Thanks for tuning in. We hope to see you next time on the Higher Powered Podcast.